Hello, welcome to the From Way Downtown podcast from IndyStar. I'm Nat Newell, our Pacers editor, here, of course, with Dustin Dopriak, our Pacers insider. We're doing a little something new here. You can still get this on all your normal audio channels, but we also are doing a live picture. So if you have been dying to know what Dustin and I look like and do not want to be hugely disappointed, then you can go to YouTube and find us there too.
There you go.
We're going to talk, of course, about Tyrese Haliburton and his struggles, the team's struggles as well, the last couple of games. Dustin, you've been pretty much the only person on the road with the team. What has Rick Carlisle said? What's Tyrese said about his shooting slump?
Well, most of them trying to say nothing, as anybody saw from the Friday night press conference. Before I even was going to bring up Tyrese, Rick was like, "Don't make this a Tyrese thing. It's not a Tyrese thing," which was on one hand fair because Tyrese wasn't the reason why Ingram had 34, wasn't the reason why they didn't have a defensive rebound in the first, and in the first quarter at all. Gave up 48 points to the Pelicans. But still, he was scoreless, 0 of 7 from the field, 0 of 6 from 3. It would have helped, if some of those shots would have went in. Similarly on Sunday, he's not the reason Victor Wembanyama is 7'4", and everybody seemed just terrified to take the ball at the rim, and for good reason, because when they did, he usually just swatted it from no matter where he was. So he's not the biggest reason they're losing basketball games, but all the same, you need your all-star point guard to score. And so, Rick Carlisle obviously shot that down. Haliburton, I talked to him on Friday night. He was just like, just a bad night, man. And, last night I was like, okay, anything up with your shot? He just no. And so Tyrese obviously is one of the brighter minds there is in this league. And he could get a job at TNT tomorrow if his career ended. He's that good at, just being able to break down the game, being able to say, okay, this is what's wrong. This is where our problems are. This is where even really for him, I think he's just that level of frustrated. At this point, he just doesn't want to talk about it. He's just bothered by the fact that the ball's not going in the hole, and just overall he hasn't been able to overcome it, basically, and especially in the last couple games. I mean, in fairness, he was really good against New Orleans on Wednesday. I mean, he didn't have a fantastic, crazy, out of hand numbers, 17 points. I think it was 7 of 15 that night, but he had 13 assists, and he really orchestrated the way they put that game away. Obviously hit the big 3-pointer to put them up, and then 3 straight assists to Pascal Siakam. But more or less, I mean, obviously his personal frustration is growing pretty high. I think he wanted no parts of doing media interviews last night at all. Just obviously certainly annoyed by the fact they're losing to, what is now a 13-48 Spurs team on the road, leaving winnable games there. I mean, for as good as Wembanyama was, and as bad as the Pacers were to start, they had a chance to win that game, and they managed to fade out down the stretch when they had some opportunities. They had a lead. They were within 4 points in the fourth quarter, just managed to fall apart. So, I mean, the frustration level is getting pretty high, and again, for good reason, lost a couple games, certainly one they should not have lost, and he's just not playing up to the standard that he had really set for most of the season.
And I went and ran the numbers, and these are the worst 5 and 10 game shooting stretches of Haliburton's career. If, when you do 5 games in a row, the game before and the game after are generally on the same list. These are sort of 5 and 10 unconnected games. So it's the actual 5 worst. The last 5 games, he's shooting 32.8% from the field overall. That's the 3rd worst stretch of his career. 3-point field goal percentages, he's at 16.1%. That's the worst. Previous worst was 22.7. And he's also got the 3rd and 4th worst percentages in a 10-game stretch in his career. So, number one, he's done this before for the most part and snapped out of it. On the other hand, this is pretty close to as bad as it got. I thought it was interesting, too, that he never went through anything close to this last year. He never had this poor of a shooting stretch. I mean, some of this is just everyone goes through slumps. How much of it do you think it's that? And then we can get into some of the more of the reasons why we think this might be happening.
Yeah, I mean, so certainly. I mean, it's a combination, I think, of all the factors. I mean, certainly, certain cases you just look at shots that are makeable. I mean, he had one that just really rattled out last night. I mean, I didn't go back and watch every 3, but I watched several of them. And I know there was one that it basically was, one of those that's down in the bucket. He was wide open. He put it where it needed to be. It rattled out. Just like wasn't anything necessarily wrong with it. Wasn't wrong with the ball movement. Just you don't have to be very off. at the end of the day, when it comes to shooting the basketball from that distance, you just have to catch the rim in the wrong part of it. Sometimes you get to go down, sometimes you don't. And so he had at least a couple of those, but he also had a couple who was short armed and everything. I think so some of this is just the guy takes a lot of threes. The guy takes them from deep. You're not going to make all of them. At some point, you're going to have a stretch where you hit a drought. You've certainly seen stretches where he's one after another, and you certainly can remember the All-Star game is not that far back that he was hitting all those. Even when he came back, I think he hit his first three against Detroit right after the All-Star game. So the part of it is just being cold. But I think there are, you do have to look at just how many different ways the game has changed for him over the last, really the last month. I mean, I'm sure there, obviously people point out and they said, okay, well, he doesn't look right necessarily. I mean, I don't think he looks that bad from a physical standpoint, but I mean, it's not that he's not hurt. I mean, like, obviously, the hamstring strain is still, less than 2 months behind him in terms of when it actually happened. I mean, he's only less than a month from having a severe minutes restriction. So that's still there. It's still going to linger. It's not a thing that should keep him out, but all the same, he's playing through something. He's playing through, feeling sore when he gets up in the morning, knowing that's still there. So that doesn't mean he shouldn't play or that he can't play. It just means that he still notices that he had a hamstring strain not that far back.
This is something that you and I talked about offline, but his free throw attempts are down from they've been around 3.5 per game the full year. In this recent stretch, I don't remember exactly which I think it was the last 5 games, something like that. He's shooting 1.9 per game. So to me, that says that there's, like you've also mentioned, maybe that's a little bit about how they're playing. It could also reflect, like, that's a tangible evidence of perhaps he's not feeling quite as explosive, or he's not quite as explosive.
Right.
So just another data point to include in the discussion.
Sure, you can look at that a bunch of different ways. Some of it might be a feeling of explosiveness where he feels really confident going to the rim. And obviously, yesterday is a different ball game. I mean, like, Wembanyama just changes what you can do. There were so many occasions where he'd get in there and be like, "I see that guy, that ball's going away." And he had one where he had like kind of the cleanest lane he had to a layup. He's like, "Okay, I'm going up, scoop shot, left hand. I've got my whole body here. There's no way he can get from." Oh my God, he did. Oh my God, he got a hold of it somehow, some way. Victor Wembanyama got a piece of this, and Haliburton was calling for a goaltend. Like, come on, man, that has to be. And I don't think it was. Like, he's just that everywhere. The guy's length is just so absurd that he can get to places that you don't think you should be able to get in, sort of over top of your body in ways that most other people can't. But I think in general, he's just done less driving of the basketball, and some of that is because he's not been the primary ball handler as much. They're trying to get him running around off the ball a little bit more and taking fewer ball screens. In general, I think Caitlin Cooper, I think, had a list of how many picks he's taken, how many kind of situations he's been ball screen, a handler in a ball screen recently, and it's significantly down. And part of that is just because they're trying to run him off the ball to try to see if they can get him some screening, some space other ways, because he's getting blitzed and double teamed so often that they feel like it hasn't been as effective. So I think that's just a big piece to it is he's getting used to the idea of, and the Pacers in general are getting used to the idea of they're putting 2 bodies there. So they're trying to use Andrew Nembhard in a lot more cases as a primary ball handler, just so they can spring him to get, just open up for some things for some shots, and he's not hitting the shots and he's not getting downhill on the ball screen. So it's in some ways he's end up losing sort of both parts of his major offense. And even when he is getting ball screens, he's dealing with 2 bodies, and so he's got to pass away, and they're blitzing too frequently, and sometimes it's not easy to hit the roll man just because of where the bodies are coming from. So they are dealing with a lot of issues there, and some of it, they're certainly bringing Pascal Siakam into the fold. He's certainly a guy that they want to get some ball handling opportunities as well, because he can create his own shot. The lack of gravity, the fact that Buddy Hield's gone is an issue. I mean, we pointed it out at the time that it could be a problem. Obviously, the fact that Doug McDermott's been dealing with a calf strain, and also even when he was playing, he wasn't shooting the ball particularly well. That gravity that they had from Buddy Hield is gone, and Doug McDermott hasn't been around the last couple of games to replace it. Ben Shepherd being out the last 2 doesn't help either. He was at least shooting pretty well off the bench. So there's a lot of those factors that are leading to less opportunities, and it is a formula for not necessarily disaster, but some not great basketball. Basically, just when it's not going in, and when you're dealing with all those sort of new factors that are sort of clogging up the offense, it's a problem all around.
And let's, to be fair, I don't know, fair is not the right word, but to lay all the information out there. A week ago, they beat the Pelicans and they beat the Mavericks. So
yeah,
this has been a poor stretch from Haliburton. The teams look terrible the last 2 games. The Spurs are an interesting team in that, like, with Wembanyama on the court, they're actually a real NBA team. And when he's not on the court, they aren't. And yet they don't play him a lot, as much as they play him a lot. They should. Don't probably doesn't seem like they play him as much as they should. So that complicates it. I mean, let's start with. I mean, do you see Siakam? I'm not one of the people who's going to say, "Oh, it's bad to have Pascal Siakam on the team because of what's going on." How long does it take, do you think, to sort of sort that aspect of this out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much longer. I mean, certainly I thought you saw great synergy on Wednesday.
Exactly,
in the win over the Pelicans. I mean, that right there was really Siakam figuring out, okay, what does this guy need me to do, and when does he need me to do it? And he really had the answers there. And Haliburton, kind of had a sense of what he was going to do. There was just really, really good synergy there. And so, that's part of it. I really think the lack of Hield is a bigger story, to it, because I don't think, Siakam played really well last night. I mean, Siakam and McConnell looked like they had a really good connection there. And it's more simple, certainly in McConnell's case, because he's not dealing with those double teams, and, he's getting single covered and he can beat his guy. And so, that helps. Basically, he's not dealing with the same kind of focus. Even though he's doing the exact same thing and killing people with it all year, nobody's changing their defense to deal with that fact. And so McConnell was literally able to lift them up in that game entirely, because Wembanyama managed to stay away. Basically, I mean, he said, I just told the bigs to stay lifted, basically stay up, foul line extended or above, to try to just keep Wembanyama away from the rim, and so that McConnell was going to be able to go there and just finish on his guy, and he was really effective at it. But like Siakam also found ways of really playing off McConnell when they were both in the game together. I know McConnell threw him an alley-oop at least, and those two guys managed. I thought Siakam did a good job of, he at least has enough length that he can kind of bump into Wemby and fade back and shoot over him. Like, not most of the guys can't do that. Like, even if you bump into him, Mathurin was, the most F it, I'm coming at you guy out of the group, because that's Benedict Mathurin. He fears nothing. No, even if it, he will put his hand on the stove, and if it burns him, he'll put it on there again. He is afraid of absolutely nothing.
He is tougher than the stove. That's yes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's what happens. He drove right at Wemby, and there were a couple times he got fouled that way. But Siakam, Mathurin wasn't making a shot over him. Siakam could kind of like bump in, fade back, hit. And he, because he's got a 7'3" wingspan, he could do that. He's capable of getting the ball up that high, even on a fadeaway to hit the shot. The rest of the guys couldn't do it, but I thought Siakam did a good job of figuring out where his options were. But those two guys played well together. And so I don't know that the Haliburton-Siakam connection is that bad. It does take some kind of ingestion to be like, okay, like this is going to work differently than how it's been working. But just as big as just Buddy being gone. And, Haliburton's the best shooter now that they have in that first unit. And he's doing some screen setting. He's doing some running around. It's a different assignment. And he doesn't have Hield there to take that kind of gravity. Obviously, Siakam takes his own, but it's in a different way. I mean, Buddy is a type of guy that goes and stands in the corner, and that defender can't leave that corner. And so you have opened up space to operate, for Haliburton, especially in the middle of the floor. Him and Turner can do a pick and roll. Him and Siakam can do a pick and roll. And so there's just less space no matter who it is, because there's not a gravity shooter that's pulling you out there. Obviously, Nesmith is a guy that they have guys who can hit shots. Nesmith has done pretty well. He was 0 for 6 last night. He didn't have a good night. Jalen Smith's shown he can hit threes. Miles Turner can hit threes. They have a bunch of guys that can hit threes, but they don't have a guy like Buddy that you have to say, well, that guy's top 25 all time. You absolutely have to stick with him or he's going to burn you. They don't have a guy like that. To like Haliburton's close than they have to it when he is hitting. So I think that's changed a lot of the geometry of the game. And again, Doug McDermott hasn't replaced it.
Yeah, I ran the numbers from with and without Buddy, and they're down a little bit in terms of shooting, but not hugely. But again, I mean, it goes back to the people. Oh, he's 6th on the team in 3-point field goal percentage. Well, yeah, he's sixth, taking 10 a game. Where the guy, it's a totally shooting 38% on 10 attempts a game is totally different than Naismith, who's shooting 3.5 or whatever it is and hitting 43%. I mean, it's just two different things. So it's some of us saw
reputation matters. Reputation still matters. Like obviously. Right. He at 38.2, that wasn't very good, but you're like, all right, well, he was at 42.5 last year, and we're talking about 4% at the end of the day. I mean, I think he was still top 15 in the league in total makes, and
he's shooting 41%, I believe, with the Sixers.
Philadelphia.
So
exactly.
You can do that at any point in time. So it'll be interesting to see how, again, the overall numbers I don't think scream out that they desperately miss Buddy Hield yet, but something seems different. Although again, hey, they won 2 good games last week. This could just be 2 bad games, but
they're not functioning.
A little bit inside.
They're not functioning the same. I mean, like they haven't had, like when they had Buddy, they had the capacity to go off for 140.
Right.
Like you haven't necessarily seen that. You haven't seen them operating that kind of pace and speed. Again, like Siakam gives them something that Buddy didn't give them and nobody else did either, is having a second guy that can go get his own. So, I mean, like on one hand, I just think you'd like to have both of them, like at the end of the day, they didn't gain anything for this team. They gained future assets, and the fact that they weren't going to let him walk. But like this team lost an asset. If they had traded for Pascal, Buddy Hield for Pascal Siakam, you'd say, okay, well, you got this and you lost this. But that's not what happened. Like they gave up Bruce Brown for Pascal Siakam, and then they gave up Buddy Hield for not much. So Siakam gives you a thing that, if everything else is broken down, Pascal Siakam can get you a bucket, and that matters. Like Haliburton can do that to some extent, but he can't physically overwhelm you the same way that Siakam can. Siakam gets you buckets with his body. By the fact that, he's got that kind of length, he's got some muscle, he can drive into you, he can hit fadeaway tough twos, basically just back into you and then step back and fade and hit it, like late clock, nothing else is working, get it into Pascal and have him make a play for you. That's an element you didn't have enough of beforehand. And so you've added that, and that matters. So like that kind of balances things out, but it's just, you don't have that wide open floor that you can go on these stretches where you're, scoring 140 a game and you're putting 1.3 points per possession because the floor is just that wide open, and Haliburton can drive through it, and Hield's hitting threes, and other guys are getting clean looks because, again, you can't help off of Buddy Hield. So there is less of that. I think obviously they'd just be a better offense if they still had Buddy.
Yeah, I think they're a better team now with Siakam after the trade deadline than they were before. But again, it goes to the point you made. They didn't have to trade Buddy Hield. At least didn't seem like they did. So it makes it an interesting.
Even acknowledging that he probably requested it. That's what sources are saying, that he requested it. Again, you don't have to.
Right.
Right. There's no requirement
to be on your team. He can be on your team for a lot of money if that's the end result. But
yes, you were going to pay him $19 million. The end of $19 million. So. And he was going to make shots and win for you. He wasn't going to blow the joint up.
I wanted to go a little inside baseball here in terms of what this situation is like for a beat writer. It is very, for an average person, it's somewhat odd to have someone coming and asking you, hey, why aren't you playing? Why aren't you doing your job well right now? At the same time, they make ridiculous sums of money because people care about things like that. What's it like knowing you have to go ask Rick Carlisle what's wrong with Tyrese Haliburton? What's it like having to ask Tyrese what's wrong? How did they handle it? How do you handle it? How does that play out in the locker room at press conferences, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, ask me at the end of the week, I guess. I mean, after Rick was just like, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm like, okay, well then you've said your piece basically, as far as I was concerned on that. Because
we should point out that the sort of defensiveness on their end says way more than anything that they could say in words, at least.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of decided I wasn't going to pull teeth with Rick at that point. Haliburton, I kind of went back to the well another time. And so and at this point I'm like, okay, you've also said your piece. And so I think, I don't know, I'm going to see just how it goes going forward. I mean, I do to give Haliburton credit and like to acknowledge, I guess, the inside baseball piece of this, and also just the human effect of it. I mean, again, Tyrese, next year is, whether he makes All NBA or not, is going to make enough money to buy an island. Like he's going to make what, either 70 or 100 times what the president of the United States makes. So, like, on one hand, it's like, okay, like it's a story when he has a bad game. On the flip side, he's 24. Or 6, depending on how you want to look at it. But I think, how am I trying to say this? Like, I am acknowledging, I'm thinking about this, that, obviously we have worked him because he's the best player. 2, he's as good at breaking down what went right and didn't go right as anybody in the league. And in part, I end up leaning on him a lot to be like, okay, what went wrong, not just for you, but for everybody. And so I think I've asked him, I've talked to him every time they've lost, whether he had a good game or not, provided he played in the game. Obviously I didn't bother him when he was sitting, when he was out with the hamstring injury, but, like, you have to acknowledge, like, okay, like I've asked a lot from you. Like I have continually asked you to stand up and be the face of this over and over and over again. And I have to acknowledge that that's, like, on a personal level unfair, on a my job level, it's what I have to do, so it's just like, okay, like kind of balancing that piece of it to say, all right, like, and he's on the whole been a pro. Like, I have to acknowledge that as well. Like, I mean, a pro's pro when it's come to dealing with this. Like, and when at home, he almost always comes out, if they've lost, he almost always signs up to be the guy who comes out and does, the podium deal. So he's signed up for that. He's aware that he's the face of the franchise. He's aware that he's the big money guy. But, you can sense that it's getting to him. You can sense that kind of, he knows that, like, he's bothered by it. He's like, you really need to talk to me today. Like, do you really have to? Can I just skip this one? I'm sick of being asked why I'm not playing well. I don't know. The ball's not going in the hoop. I don't know what magic you want me to tell you here. It's just not good. I'll go back in the gym. I'll shoot again. Like, you can sense the frustration. So it's like, it is a weird thing to kind of, deal with as a beat writer, especially when you're not dealing with podium press conferences, when it's not like, like he's in front of you, the mic is going to come to you, you have to ask a question. It's like, okay, like you do have to summon him, when you go on the press conference and he's sitting there, yesterday he was kind of just like, towel on his head type of deal, like looking at his phone, like, oh my God, like, I cannot believe this happened. And I'm like, well, I still got to talk to you, like, that's kind of how it works. So yeah, it's not easy, with Carlisle, you sort of figure out, like, you're constantly taking his temperature for how he's talking anyway, for where he's going, where he's not going, and sometimes he'll give you, he'll not give you an answer one day and give you an answer to the same question the next day. And it's odd to sort of figure out, okay, like, when are you going to try to go back to the well and see if it works? It's playing with the mind of Rick Carlisle is a trip in and of itself. Obviously he's a, incredible basketball mind in and of itself, but sometimes, like, he's going to go there. Sometimes you can go someplace and get a well of information. Sometimes he's just going to cut you off. I mean, like, literally from, talked to him Saturday in practice and asked him about Wembanyama and how good he was and everything. He just gave me this really expansive answer that I ended up saving and having to use, in my, kind of gamer yesterday, because when I asked him about how good he was in the game, he was like, man, was plus 19, man. That's a lot of impact. And that's as far as he went. You're like, all right. Sometimes you just never know when you're going to get all of the knowledge that is in Rick Carlisle's head. And sometimes when he's just going to cut you off because he doesn't want to talk about it. So,
yeah, and I mean, Rick Carlisle has been around a long time. The number of times, I mean, these guys know, Rick Carlisle knows what you're going to ask him, he knows what the media is going to ask him pretty much, a vast majority of the time. You might be able to think about asking in a way that he hasn't thought of or something like that. And Rick Carlisle is going to tell you what he wants to tell you. I mean, I always get a chuckle out of the people on Twitter and X that say, you're not asking the tough questions. Well, you ask the tough questions and they don't answer them. You can't make them answer the questions, especially someone a veteran like Rick. He's probably not going to get mad and say something he doesn't want to say.
No,
Haliburton's interesting to me, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts, in that when something's not working, he is no issue saying, what am I doing wrong? What do I need to do to fix it? With the coaches, he'll do that publicly. With the media, some just say, here's the process I'm going through. What does it say that it doesn't seem like he has that answer right now?
Just that, like I said, just that he's frustrated. Just that he's frustrated. I just think, and in the moment, again, it is different when he has some time to kind of get his head right and come out to the podium. It is a little bit different when it's on the road. Usually he's pretty good on the road. But I think it's just he's still stewing in it. Like he's still stewing in it. And he's generally been a little bit different, not this different. And it's piling up. You can just sense it building. The frustration is building, that he doesn't have anything to say. There's parts, I'm sure there's parts of him that, like, whenever he says, like, man, you see it. What do you, like, what are you asking me for? Like, you watch the game, right? Like, what do you want me to tell you that you didn't see already? And the fact is, I don't see it at his level. So there's obviously stuff that he's going to get or process or understand in terms of how the pieces are moving that I don't necessarily catch. And obviously I'm not, playing in there, so it's not the same thing. But I think it's just growing frustration. I don't think it means that it's a problem that he can't possibly solve. But some of it is just the ball needs to go in. Some of it is just not. It's not a situation of, oh man, if I do this differently, if I do this different with my hands or with my feet or with my this or with my that, like sometimes the ball just doesn't go. It's not as, like, it can be complicated. It can be a mechanical issue. It can be something else. It's just sometimes the shots just don't fall. And, whether it's confidence or, like, it's just very slight differences between when the ball goes in and when it doesn't go in. So you can drive yourself crazy on that. Oh, it is absolutely a maddening, part of the sport. I think, shooting the ball, hitting a baseball are two of those things that, like, when it's going great. And sometimes it can just stop going and maybe you're not doing anything wrong. You go through a stretch where it doesn't work. And I think he's in one of those stretches. There's more to it. There's other factors, but, like, sometimes I think he's just, man, I'm putting it up and it's just not going down. And that's all there is to it. And I'm just got to keep hitting shots until they start going in again.
You referenced the All-NBA thing. Again, we'll hit it quick for anyone who's not an in-depth Pacers fan. If he does not make All-NBA, one of the three teams, it costs him roughly $50 million.
Over the course of 5 years. Yeah.
Over 5 years, which he's making a lot of money regardless, but I don't care who you are. $10 million a year is a lot of money.
Yes.
And it's hard for me to see that he'd have to play like this literally every game the rest of the way for him not to, it seems like, to not make one of the three All-NBA teams. But do you think that's playing on his mind a little bit, that just how much is at stake for him?
It's got to be in the background. I mean, because he got asked about it several times. Obviously, I asked about it, when he came back. So he was talking about it, obviously, on JJ Redick's podcast.
And this goes back to how many he has to play 65 games, and with the injury, was he going to get there or not? So this has been a topic of discussion before that.
Right. It became. I definitely think that what's tough there is it becomes a talking point before I think you want it to be, like, as far as, because it's still, obviously if he played 82, like, he's still got to make All-NBA, and right. That's not easy. I mean, you're talking about being one of the best 15 players in the world that year. Like, obviously you get a couple guys that end up getting eliminated because of the 65 game rule. Obviously, I think Joel Embiid is going to fall short. So that's one spot you don't have to worry about. But, like, and I think it's non-positional now. So, like, Embiid being out literally does open up a position for Tyrese Haliburton. But you got one of the best 15 guys. And, I mean, he can play his way out of that. Like, you forget how many absurdly good players there are in this league. At this point, I mean, like, you're talking, guys that you got to guarantee, off the bat that are sure things would be, Joker, Giannis, Shai, Tatum, Luka, there's five, like, right out of the gate that, okay, like, you're not passing up those guys. I mean, I think Durant, like, LeBron could get there. Who am I just forgetting off the top?
Devin Booker, Anthony Davis.
Giannis
Antetokounmpo.
Jalen Brunson's got a shot.
Who suffered an injury last night. I haven't seen how serious it is yet.
I haven't either. Donovan Mitchell, I think
another good one. Yep.
Really lifted that team to get to the point that they're a top three team. Like, Maxey is fringe. I think Haliburton's ahead of him, but
Willard, I don't know if we mentioned him.
Anthony Edwards has been fantastic.
Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, all the Timberwolves.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys that are at least that have to be part of the discussion that are really, really, really good players. And so, obviously when you're an Eastern Conference starter and it wasn't a tough argument in terms of him getting one of those spots, you got to feel pretty good about where you stand, but you're not a stone cold lock. Like, you can't average 15 a game and get in there,
Right.
Like if he averages 15 a game the rest of the way, there's no way. Like, even if he leads the league in assists, like I don't think he can get there. I think he's got to be averaging 20, minimum at least. And he's got to be shooting around 40% from three, like that. You've got to be able to look at the whole resume and say, well, that's a guy that belongs. And he certainly has got to lift them to wins. I mean, if they're an 8 seed, and if they fall back to the point that there's some space between them at 7, it becomes a lot easier to talk yourself out of giving Tyrese Haliburton an All-NBA vote. I mean, so I'd have to go with the whole list and say, okay, who else belongs there? Who are some other guys that could take that spot? But I mean, he can certainly play his way out of it without it being an issue in the 65 games. I imagine that is something in the back of his mind. I mean, right now he's not playing like an All-NBA player. I don't think he knows that. I don't think you need to tell him. They're also losing games that are winnable. I mean, he certainly wants this team to get to the playoffs, not just to play in. I mean, again, I don't think if they're in the play-in round that's a death knell from them. I think they can get in through the play-in because I just don't see them losing to a Chicago or an Atlanta or a Brooklyn or something like that. And, Toronto might be a different story. But I don't see them losing to those 3 teams if it's all or nothing. But all the same, you don't want to play in that game where your reward is you get to play Boston. Especially, like I don't think Boston is going to be as nuclear when you get to April as they are right now. Like I think there's going to be some fade off. They're not going to beat teams like Golden State by 50 at this point. Dear Lord, what a crushing, blowout that was. But all the same, you don't want them like that. Boston, for as much as they have vulnerability, I think they also have an edge right now that they are sick of being told that they're just a regular season team. I think they want to blow everybody's doors off right now. And so, if you're the first team through the door there, they are going to want to beat the crap out of you as an 8 seed. If they're a 1, they are going to want to make leave, no doubt, and put you away. And so you don't want the Celtics. I mean, you have a chance against a Cleveland or a Milwaukee. Even if you end up with the 7 or the 6, you got a chance at least winning a couple from them. I think Boston, even though they've beaten Boston before, and it's not impossible for them to get a game, I think the Celtics are going to be on a run, and you want to avoid that. So for all those reasons, I mean, I think there is a lot of pressure on him, and I think it's building. And when you're feeling pressure and you're frustrated, you're like, I don't want to talk anymore. And so I get it.
We'll finish up just team in general again. A week ago, they were playing very well, or they had 2 good wins. We actually did a podcast after they
Sure.
lost to the Raptors and talked about how they weren't playing great, but they won the next game after that and have now are where they are. You just did an excellent job breaking down that. I mean, where they're 8th in the East, with Brunson possibly being out on top of Embiid being out. All of a sudden, it looks like there's a few more spots, so it's even more frustrating to be going through what they're going through right now.
Yeah.
Just what else do you see in terms of the team? Where's the team in general at this point?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they continue just to have these, up and down stretches where it's just amazing how good they can look on a given night and then how bad they can look on a given night, just from game to game. And obviously they're just not a good defensive team to start with, like they are, on their best nights, they're, a little bit better than average. And they can do a few defensive things well that so it's good enough that you can hold a team to like 111 or 110 or whatever and win a game that way. But they're not going to be able to hold down teams enough that they can win without really scoring the basketball. So it's just, there's just and it seems like they have the last couple games when they get up off the canvas once they get hit, but they've hit these stretches early in games where they're like knocked back and it takes them a while to get back up, and then they've given you a cushion. I think they've obviously, they were able to maintain contact for the most last night, and San Antonio should have really buried them. A better team would have buried them.
Well, San Antonio with Wembanyama should have buried them.
Shoot. True.
Without Wembanyama, they would have lost by 15, which is just how bad that team is.
When Zach Collins is your big man, I mean, it's just and they've got a couple okay pieces, but just collectively they're just not good. But yeah, I mean, they've just had some ugly quarters in this stretch, and they've rallied back, but just had some bad enough stretches of basketball that it doesn't look great. I mean, like that first unit's got to get right again. Obviously, Aaron Nesmith's got to get right again too, and just obviously he's still getting his rhythm back. Doesn't look like he's in bad shape or in any means. It's just, I mean, he hasn't hit any shots yet. It's just, not many anyway. His offensive rhythm, needs to take a while to come to him. And they've just faced some guys that have really gone off on them. So it's just, it's just not, there's just not a lot of synergy there right now. Now, I mean, they could get it together and they could go out and beat Dallas on the road. Would not shock me one bit if they're just a totally different basketball team tomorrow. That's kind of who they are. They have these stretches. They really find it, and they're able to turn around and be a different team today than they were yesterday in a good way. And then they can do it and do the exact same thing the opposite way. They're just that kind of inconsistent. It's youth. It's still, them figuring themselves out. That doesn't bode well for the long term for, once they get in the postseason, presuming they do. I still presume they're going to get in the postseason. I mean, that doesn't bode well for the long term. Their highs are still really high, their lows are still really low. And it's just, again, they have to be really good offensively to be able to beat you. And they can be really good offensively, but they have to be, because it's just, they're not holding you under 115.
All right. Well, we appreciate you listening and maybe watching the From Way Downtown podcast. We'll please go to IndyStar.com for everything Dustin writes, and we will be back at the next either super high or super low, the way this team goes.
It could be either one. A week from now, we'll do this again, and they could be 3-0 between now and then, or they could not.
Could be talking about whether they're going to win a first-round playoff series. So
exactly.
Thank you for watching.